The first blank should be filled with injured because it describes the body parts that octopuses nurse and protect, indicating their ability to feel pain. The second blank should be filled with sophisticated because it highlights the advanced sensory capacities of octopuses, such as excellent eyesight and acute sensitivity to taste and smell. The third blank should be filled with complex because it refers to the intricate behavior of octopuses, which is supported by their large nervous systems. The fourth blank should be filled with complicated because it describes the challenging relationship between the octopus's brain and body, making their subjective experience difficult to understand. The first blank should be filled with prestigious because it describes the high status of Shanghai International Studies University, which is recognized internationally. The second blank should be filled with opinion because it refers to the global public perception of China, which the university's research institutes and centers aim to influence. The third blank should be filled with established because it indicates the formation of partnerships with universities and institutions worldwide. The fourth blank should be filled with maintained because it describes the ongoing connections with international organizations, ensuring continuous collaboration. The first blank should be filled with root because it refers to the origin of the word tectonics, which comes from the Greek word meaning to build. The second blank should be filled with refers because it explains what plate tectonics means, describing the construction of the Earth's surface. The third blank should be filled with states because it presents the theory of plate tectonics, which explains the movement of the Earth's outermost layer. The fourth blank should be filled with fragmented because it describes the division of the Earth's outermost layer into plates. The fifth blank should be filled with relative because it describes the movement of plates in relation to one another. The first blank should be filled with ideal because it describes the suitability of Europa for life, which is now questioned due to the presence of corrosive substances. The second blank should be filled with virtually because it indicates that almost all information about Europa comes from the spacecraft Galileo. The third blank should be filled with although because it introduces a contrasting idea about the perception of Europa. The fourth blank should be filled with recent because it refers to the latest measurements that reveal new information. The fifth blank should be filled with however because it introduces an exception to the findings, suggesting that the corrosive substances might only be on the surface. The first blank should be filled with anecdotes because it refers to stories about Gauss's childhood, highlighting his early mathematical talent. The second blank should be filled with discoveries because it describes Gauss's mathematical achievements, which he made as a teenager. The third blank should be filled with corrected because it describes Gauss's action of fixing an error in his father's payroll calculations at a very young age. The first blank should be filled with emotions because it describes the messages communicated by chimpanzees through their posture, gestures, and facial expressions. The second blank should be filled with greeting because it describes the action of acknowledging a dominant individual, which is a common social behavior among chimpanzees. The third blank should be filled with subordinates because it refers to the less dominant individuals who show submissive signals. The fourth blank should be filled with reassurance because it describes the gestures made by the dominant individual to comfort the subordinates. The first blank should be filled with land because it describes the area where Pullman, Illinois, was built, emphasizing the scale of the project. The second blank should be filled with community because it refers to the planned industrial area, highlighting its significance as the first of its kind in the United States. The third blank should be filled with houses because it describes the residential buildings constructed for the workers, some of which still exist today. The first blank should be filled with question because it refers to the inquiry about music, which is a fundamental aspect of understanding the concept. The second blank should be filled with examples because it refers to specific pieces of music that people can recognize. The third blank should be filled with knowledge because it describes the understanding of music, which varies among individuals. The first blank should be filled with divided because it describes the separation of human history into eras, according to McLuhan's theory. The second blank should be filled with outline because it describes the presentation of the concept in McLuhan's book. The third blank should be filled with released because it refers to the publication of the book, which introduced the theory. The fourth blank should be filled with predicted because it describes McLuhan's foresight about the electronic age. The fifth blank should be filled with access because it describes the availability of information through technology, which characterizes the global village. The first blank should be filled with production because it describes the creation of items made from pewter, which has been used since Roman times. The second blank should be filled with consisting because it describes the composition of pewter, which is mostly tin mixed with other metals. The third blank should be filled with mixed because it describes the combination of metals to create pewter. The fourth blank should be filled with harden because it describes the process of making pewter more durable by adding other metals. The first blank should be filled with compass because it refers to the device that finds north. The second blank should be filled with pointing because it describes the action of indicating direction. The third blank should be filled with true because it refers to the direction of the North Pole. The fourth blank should be filled with magnetic because it describes the north that moves due to the Earth's molten iron core. The fifth blank should be filled with core because it refers to the Earth's outer layer where molten iron flows. The first blank should be filled with environment because it refers to the zero-gravity conditions inside the ISS. The second blank should be filled with damage because it describes the harm to the body's muscles. The third blank should be filled with muscles because it refers to the body parts affected by zero gravity. The fourth blank should be filled with restricted because it describes the limitation on the duration of stays aboard the ISS. The fifth blank should be filled with deteriorated because it describes the decline in astronauts' vision after spending time in space. The first blank should be filled with autumn because it refers to the season when plants prepare for winter. The second blank should be filled with leaves because it describes the parts of the plant that drop off. The third blank should be filled with waxy because it describes the coatings that protect evergreen foliage. The fourth blank should be filled with shed because it describes the action of dropping leaves. The fifth blank should be filled with salvage because it describes the action of recovering important nutrients. The first blank should be filled with experience because it refers to living away from home for the first time. The second blank should be filled with definite because it describes the clear break from home. The third blank should be filled with sources because it refers to the usual support systems. The fourth blank should be filled with facilitate because it describes the action of making adjustment easier. The first blank should be filled with awarded because it describes the grant given by ARENA. The second blank should be filled with partnership because it refers to the collaboration between institutions. The third blank should be filled with barriers because it describes the obstacles to investment. The fourth blank should be filled with ideal because it describes Australia's suitability for tidal energy. The first blank should be filled with donors because it refers to the individuals who gave to charity. The second blank should be filled with organizations because it refers to the non-profit bodies that receive donations. The third blank should be filled with emphasis because it describes the focus on disaster relief. The fourth blank should be filled with average because it refers to the typical percentage of household income given to charity. The first blank should be filled with turning because it describes Durkheim's shift in focus. The second blank should be filled with left for because it describes his move to Germany. The third blank should be filled with resulted in because it describes the outcome of his time in Germany. The fourth blank should be filled with gained because it describes the recognition he received in France. The first blank should be filled with surprisingly because it describes the expected popularity of coral reefs among divers. The second blank should be filled with support because it describes the livelihoods provided by coral reefs. The third blank should be filled with people because it refers to the individuals who depend on coral reefs. The fourth blank should be filled with double because it describes the expected increase in the number of people. The fifth blank should be filled with acidification because it describes the threat to coral reefs from increased seawater acidity. The first blank should be filled with prove because it describes the action of establishing a suspect's presence at a crime scene. The second blank should be filled with maintain because it describes the action of keeping a DNA database. The third blank should be filled with samples because it refers to the DNA collected from crime scenes. The first blank should be filled with discourse because it refers to the role of language in law and socio-cultural processes. The second blank should be filled with ideas because it refers to people's beliefs about how language works. The third blank should be filled with linguistic because it describes the type of anthropologists studying language. The fourth blank should be filled with tools because it refers to the analytic methods developed by anthropologists.